The NFL draft is just 2 months away, so I bring you my latest NFL mock draft. Who will your team pick and who'll go first overall? Find out soon on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Worsley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. And once again, I'm bringing you my latest NFL mock draft as I take you through the whole first round of what I expect to happen in this year's upcoming NFL draft. I've been lucky enough to finish in the top 12 in accuracy in mock drafts in 3 of the last 4 years on Fantasy Pro. So hoping to make that happen again. If you've got any questions or comments, please pop them below in the comment sections, or you can hit us up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Plus, make sure you like and subscribe so you can check out all of the updates that I'll be bringing you in our mock draft and also in my fantasy rankings. And if you want updated dynasty rankings, you can also go to ffdfantasyfootball.com, where I have my latest updated dynasty rankings ready for free agency and the draft. But let's get into this mock draft. And we've already got a change at number 1. With these things, I do tend to trust the bookmakers. They're very accurate, even this far out. And Cam Ward is the bookie's favorite. In fact, he is the odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall pick. I know a lot of people do have other people going there, but while I think Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are superior talents, realistically, the Titans need a quarterback. So this, for me, is where they're likely to go. I think Cam Ward is the pick. He is the better athlete. He has more upside. He also doesn't have his father coming in and making things difficult for whatever team drafts him. I think he is the direction the Titans will go in. And that makes things interesting for everyone below as well. Number 2, it's a very interesting pick. I have them going Abdul Carter, which does seem to be the direction this is starting to go in now. Cleveland do have Deshaun Watson still on their books. I just don't think they're in a position where they can win in the next couple of years with his bogey of a contract there. While he's probably out for most of 2025, I mean, realistically, it's not like they're going to be able to win in that situation. They got players wanting out. I do think Carter at least gives them a replacement for Myles Garrett as an elite pass rusher. He and Travis Hunter are the clear top 2 guys in this draft. So I've got them going with Carter. It makes more sense than going with Shedeur Sanders, especially when his dad is coming in and saying he would block a move to Cleveland. They could also go in some other direction as well. Hunter wouldn't be out of the question, but Carter just seems to be the pick they prefer. That means that Sanders can go to the Giants. Giants badly need a quarterback now that the Daniel Jones experiment is finally over. Cam Ward was looking like a possibility at one stage, but I think they're going to need to trade up if they're going to have any chance of getting him. Heck, they might even need to trade up to 2 to get Sanders if someone else is sniffing around, because I do think it's possible someone like the Raiders or even the Jets wants to move up to that 2 spot in order to get their quarterback. I don't know that Sanders or even Ward is really good enough for that trade up, but I don't know, teams be doing stupid things. So it is very possible that would happen. If that occurs, then obviously they would go for Carter or Hunter. I think Hunter probably makes more sense to them. But in this case, they can get a quarterback. So they go with Sanders. He's an accurate passer. He's a confident guy. He's smart. He's got a great football IQ. Little bit of a love-hate prospect. How aggressive the Giants are willing to get with him really depends on how they feel about him as a prospect. I do feel like they're likely to be a little bit desperate, though. And that means Travis Hunter falls to the Patriots. I have heard that they do really love Abdul Carter. That's a Charlie Campbell report. Should mention, by the way, the main guys I go to for my news on this stuff, Charlie Campbell and anyone at Walter Football, really fantastic. Go check out their reports. They do some great stuff on the draft. Tony Pauline's also excellent. And also a few of the beat reporters around the place also do some good work, but those are the top 3 guys that I would go with. Charlie Campbell has reported that Abdul Carter seems to be the guy they love. I did consider the possibility they might need to sort out their O-line, but this feels too early for the tackles at this stage. Also, not impossible that they go with someone like McMillan, who would be a wide receiver prospect. They clearly have a need there. But I think it makes more sense to go with the superior prospect and go with Hunter. Hunter would go in and play cornerback for them, but I would expect him to play the occasional wide receiver snaps, which obviously would help them out because that is a need for them as well. Honestly, there's 4 good players in this draft, and I do think the Patriots are in a good spot here to grab one of those 4 at least. Will Johnson goes at number 5 to the Jags. Last mock, I had the tackle going there, but I do think they're probably going to go with the cornerback Johnson. It is very close. I really did toss up. Mason Graham was who I had going there before. He is a falling prospect. Kenneth Grant seems to have gone past him, but I have neither of them going to the Jags here because I do feel like Johnson is far and away the best cornerback prospect not named Travis Hunter. There is a big gap below Johnson, and realistically, the Jags need to be able to stop other teams from passing on them. The only way to really do that is either to increase their pass rush, which I don't think they're really going to do with those tackles, or to improve their secondary. They need some real talent in there, and Johnson is that talent. A real pure cornerback, long, fast, take some risks, but I feel like that's kind of something you don't necessarily mind at that level. So I do feel like he's someone that they can work with, improve, and it can turn into a much improved team in defense, which they badly need. And that leaves the Raiders with a couple of options. While trading up for a quarterback is a real option, or hoping that one falls, it's not impossible Sanders makes it to this spot. After all, it's not like the Patriots or the Jags need someone. But assuming that that doesn't occur, I feel like they could go for either of the defensive linemen. They were a little bit weak there. If Will Johnson falls, I'm confident they'll take him. That's who I had them getting in their in my last mock draft. But here I've got them going for McMillan, who's a great consolation prize. They finally get a big-bodied number 1 receiver that can work in conjunction with Jakobi Meyers, who is more naturally a number 2, and Brock Bowers, who was obviously their star pick last season. If they can do that, they can really get the pieces in place for bringing in whatever quarterback they go with. They could easily go with someone like a Sam Darnold or something like that in free agency, and we'll know that by that point. Or alternatively, maybe they just wait till next year, kind of punt on this year, and then grab someone like an Arch Manning or something like that. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I feel like in this situation, McMillan is the pick. There's no way after his Senior Bowl efforts that Jalen Milroe is going anywhere near here. Might even go in the second round, or potentially they go for someone else like a Jackson Dart, who I think has kind of gone past Milroe at this stage based on what we've seen in the Senior Bowl and what we've heard out of a lot of people as well. So I've even heard Jackson Dart's likely in the first round. That was Jason LaConfora who announced that, and he's not bad with his accuracy on that sort of stuff. So it is possible that the Raiders might even trade up back into the first round to make that happen, or that someone else will do the same. Because another team that needs a quarterback is the Jets, and it wouldn't be a surprise if they grab someone, given Aaron Rodgers is now officially out the door. They're kind of hitting the rebuild. But with a defensive head coach, I think it kind of makes more sense for them to sort out the defense first. They've got Quinnen Williams, but they really need a big run-stuffing, pressure-creating guy next to him to open up some lanes for Williams. That's Kenneth Grant to me. More of a run defender than Mason Graham, but also the better player, I think. Assuming someone like a Will Johnson doesn't fall to this spot, I think that's unlikely given the team's trading before him. I think Grant makes the most sense. It's an awkward spot because there's not really any obvious options at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if they want to trade up to try to get a slightly better prospect here. If they could get up to 4 to get Hunter, for example, that would be amazing. Or if they could get up even higher to get a quarterback, I think they would do that. Wouldn't surprise me if we don't see the Jets picking at 7 come draft day. But if they do, I do think tackle is a real possibility. Going below them, we know the Panthers probably going to go for edge. It is by far their greatest need. Defensive tackle's not out of the question, but with Mason Graham falling among teams and Grant now off the board, kind of makes sense to go for an edge rusher. If they could somehow get their hands on Abdul Carter, I'm sure they would do that, but I think that's highly unlikely. So that leaves them with Michael Williams. I had James Pierce here previously, but there have been reports, again from Charlie Campbell, talking about teams being concerned about character concerns, a lot of things they've seen that they weren't really happy about behind the scenes. And Williams is the guy that is rising up. He's a very safe pick relatively. Makes more sense for what the Panthers are trying to do with their rebuild with a young quarterback. They can now put some pieces in place around him. They really need essentially a Brian Burns replacement. Williams isn't a natural Burns replacement, but I still think he would be a very good pick here. And there's Mason Graham. I feel like this is a little bit early for him either. He easily could drop out of the top 10. A lot of people mocking him even earlier than that. Really depends on how you feel about him and how you think the teams are going to feel of him. A lot of people putting him around this spot or to the Jets. I think this makes a little bit more sense. There have been a lot of question marks over his build and his body shape. Is a slightly bigger guy than you often see in that position for how he plays. I do think Grant's the better player, but Graham would certainly be a viable option here. They'd love to get their hands on someone like a Will Johnson, but I just don't think that's an option here. Edge rush is also a possibility, but with Williams off the board, I think Graham makes significantly more sense. Look, don't get me wrong, they would love to get a quarterback if the right one falls, but I don't think that's likely to happen here. And they've just got so many holes on defense. And I think their offense, it's hard to know what they even had. Wide receiver is not really an option at this point. So I feel like this is the pick that makes sense. Don't be surprised if they trade back to try to pick up more ammo for later on in the draft when they can kind of fill this defensive position and also get some other guys as well. Now, here's the first offensive line, which is quite late in the draft for this to happen. Usually we see some O-linemen coming off in the top 5. Not this year, though. Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks are the two clear top guys, but even they're not great options. I feel like you're going to have to be really desperate for an O-lineman to really reach too early for them. And I do think the Bears are probably quite desperate for one. They need to find a way of protecting Caleb Williams. They put plenty of weapons around him. Now they need to go out and make sure that other teams can't access him so he can actually operate. Campbell has a bit of a lack of length, and that might see him move to guard, which wouldn't be the end of the world because the Bears need a guard as well. So I feel like they can afford to take the risk on a guy who is a very safe prospect. We just don't know where on the O-line he's exactly going to end up. Obviously, if the play calling also improves, they may not need as much O-line help, but I feel like it is still their greatest need and their most likely option. Could go D lineman if someone like a Graham falls. Not out of the question. They go for Ashton Jeanty, who's kind of belongs in this general range. But I feel like they've got enough in DeAndre Swift to make that work if they improve the O-line. Another O-lineman goes here in Kelvin Banks. A lot of talk about San Fran trying to get some speed rushes, but for me, they need to do a better job of getting back to running the ball. We saw them be very good at that at times in the past and last year, not just because of the Christian McCaffrey injury and all the other injuries around that, but they just generally didn't look like they had the same O-line they've had in the past. Kelvin Banks is one of the two top O-linemen here. Can he play at tackle? Maybe, potentially. Is that even what they need, the 49ers? I'm not entirely sure, but I do feel an O-lineman is an option here and probably provides the best value here. If they feel good about someone like a James Pierce, they could easily go for that edge rush talent. Defensive tackle not out of the question. It's very possible that Mason Graham will go at this spot as well. There's no one else that's really an obvious pick here, so that's why I went with Banks. But any of those three positions make sense on either of the lines, really. And here's Ashton Jeanty. Look, this is one of the best running backs we've seen in a few years. Hard to know exactly because he's played against some weaker opposition at times, and he didn't look great against better opponents. But you also got to remember he doesn't exactly have the best blocking playing at Boise State. So I think that means that it does make sense for Dallas. But then again, we all talked about how Dallas was going to need to get a running back last year, and they didn't draft one at all. And they ended up going with Rico Dowdle. Dowdle's now a free agent, so Jeanty coming in would make sense. You can imagine that Jerry Jones goes, ooh, remember when we had Zeke? Let's go back and get a guy that's going to be able to play on all three downs and be very good and be a major weapon for us. Kind of makes sense, I guess. If I were them personally, I would go with a wide receiver. Luther Burden's hanging around here, for example. It's a bit early for him, but I think it would make sense. What they really should do, though, is sort out their lines. Defensive tackle would really help out Muzzie Smith, who has looked pretty awful. They get someone like a Mason Graham or a Kenneth Grant, and all of a sudden they might get more out of Smith as well. Or one of the other talents that's around here, trade down, get one of those guys and get some more weapons later on. Or potentially get some offensive linemen. You got Tyler Booker here, who would be really good on the interior, replacing the talented guys that they're losing. They used to have a great O-line. They don't anymore. So I feel like picking someone up to improve that makes sense. But I think this is what most likely to happen, even though I think it's kind of stupid. Not unusual for the Cowboys to do stupid things like hiring Brian Schottenheimer and things like that, though. And here's Tyler Booker. Going to the Dolphins realistically do need to improve the protection for Tua. If they're going to win, they need him to be healthy, and that's a big question mark when the line is just not strong enough. We've seen how much they struggle without him. They also need to improve their run game, which has been one of their greatest weapons of late, but really took a step back last year. So I can feel like this makes a lot of sense. They could also go defensive tackle if they feel the value's there, but I think it's probably not at this stage. There's not really a third guy I think makes sense this early. So if these other two guys are gone, it would make sense to go O-line. Also not totally out of the question. They'd go tight end. Jonnu Smith is not exactly young. We've seen how effective they can be when they use their tight end properly. So Tyler Warren here wouldn't be crazy. This is exactly the pick where Brock Bowers went last year. Warren is not Brock Bowers. He's not that good a receiver, but he is a good blocker. And so adding a better blocking tight end might actually help them improve the line in a different way as well. And they can then go get a guard in the second round, for example. And there is Tyler Warren. Really tossed up with the Colts here. They could easily go secondary as well. There's two good safeties in this draft that we'll see later on. They could also go cornerback, though I do feel like this is a little bit early for Thomas. And it's not out of the question that they will trade back to get a little bit more value with these picks. But if Tyler Warren's there, maybe they finally stop stuffing around with all the different tight ends they've been using. There's like cycling 4 tight ends on game day. It just doesn't make any sense. They've gotten rid of Gus Bradley. Maybe they finally get rid of some of the other weaknesses they've got going around and try to strengthen a little bit across the board. And I feel like it makes sense to start at tight end here, give a good receiving weapon for Anthony Richardson, and then they can sort out the secondary with the rest of the draft. Maybe add one more wide receiver as well, potentially. James Pearce, a bit of a fall from my last draft. Had him at 8 last time. Now he moves down to 15. And he could easily go lower as well. It's just that I really feel like the Falcons need an edge rusher. I've been mocking them one for the last 2 seasons. Last season, I had them getting Laiatu Latu. Obviously, they then fell in love with Michael Penix and went with him instead. Latu apparently was going to be the pick before that occurred. So seems like they do really want to improve on the edge. And they need to. Micah Williams would have been great, but obviously he's gone. So that means Pearce is the option. Not crazy for them to go quarterback here or even the interior of the line. But I think that Pearce, if he's there, I feel like they probably take the risk. That just feels like the kind of thing they would probably do. Cardinals also go with an edge rusher here. They're kind of going a little bit earlier because there's kind of a group of 4 solid options here, and there are some teams who need one. I've got defensive tackle there. He is an edge rusher, Jalon Walker. I feel like this makes perfect sense. They need to improve their lines. This is where the edge rush talent is. They could go defensive lineman. I know a lot of people are mocking them. Walton Nolan, for example. I feel like this is too early for him. But if they're one of those teams that really has fallen in love with him, and I'll talk about him later on, this would make sense here. They could also go O-line if Booker falls to this point, or one of the tackles, which is entirely possible. But I've got them going Walker here. I feel like this is kind of a bit early for him, but he does fit their scheme. He is an outside linebacker only as an edge rusher, and I feel like that's what the Cardinals often use. They need to replace multiple guys who are moving on as free agents. So unless they re-sign them, Walker makes the most sense. I had the Bengals previously going wide receiver with Luton Burden, but it seems like they're going to be bringing back T. Higgins. That makes life really awkward. So Burton could still be the pick. It's not like they've got much out of Jermaine Burton, who, of course, was their 3rd-round pick last time. He was like a first-round talent who's got some real personality issues, and they've already started to come through. Obviously, since losing Tyler Boyd, they haven't really found a number 3, but how much money do they really want to be paying for their wide receivers, especially if they're bringing back T. Higgins on the tag, and they also have Jamar Chase? How are they going to afford everyone else? I feel like they need to improve their secondary. Could easily go cornerback here. That would make a lot of sense. Someone like Thomas, but I've got them going Nick Emmanwori. Just such a talented safety. Big, strong, talented, solid speed. Amazing for a guy his size to play as well as he does. He would be a great pick here. It's not exactly a premium position. Teams often don't like to use their first-round picks on guys like safeties and guards and people like that. But in this case, we're talking about a guy who's good enough to make up for that. Josh Simmons, a bit of a riser for me. Did tear his ACL, and that hurts, but it does seem like a lot of teams like him. So I do have the Seahawks going for him here. Previously, I had them going Tyler Booker. I do think they'd go with Booker if Booker falls to this point. If not, though, Simmons is a viable option. He can also play tackle, which means this is a weird pick, given I think the Seahawks really do need more help on the inside. But this still feels like the pick that makes the most sense for him. They could easily go edge rusher, but no one's fallen to them here. Not out of question for them to go Jahad Campbell, who is an interior linebacker. Look, inside linebackers don't really go this early in the draft usually. And yet, I have him going to the Buccaneers. Levante David is retiring soon. I just think this pick makes sense. There's some edge rushers here they could take. They could take someone like a Nick Skirton, who I've got going quite a bit later. If Jelon Walker's still around, I think they probably prefer him. They do need to replace Joe Choyinka, who was just so disappointing after his first round selection 4 years ago. But I've got them going with Campbell. He is an elite inside linebacker prospect. I really do like the idea of a team taking him somewhere in this range because I feel like you're not going to get a player of his caliber anywhere else in the draft after this point. Speaking of high caliber players in awkward positions, here's another one. It's Malaki Starks out of Georgia. Really excellent safety. Some people have been mocking him as high as 13. I can't get that high on him. I prefer Emanwari over him. But Stark is still a very, very good player. I had him in college fantasy for the last 3 or 4 years. So I've been watching him a little bit, and he's been great. I think he deserves to go in the first, even though safeties generally do slip. A lot of people mocking wide receivers to the Broncos. Doesn't really make sense to me. I can imagine a Luther Burden or an Egbuka here, but I don't know. They've got Troy Franklin. They've got Marvin Mims. They've got Devon Vele. They've all been pretty good next to Cortland Sutton. So I don't know. I think they've probably got enough guys. I don't think it really makes sense. Bo Nix was perfectly effective with what they had. Also not impossible to go tight end. Tyler Warren could easily fall to this point, or they could reach a little bit and go for someone like a Colston Loveland. That would make sense here as well. And here's Luther Burden. Look, the Steelers don't usually go for wide receivers this early, but Art Rooney has come out and said they do need a wide receiver, and he definitely has the ability to have a say on that. Burden would make sense here. He's kind of like a good complement to George Pickens, who's big and strong. Burden, smaller, faster type. I think it would make sense to pick him here. They could also reach for a quarterback. I've got Milroe there, but it would equally make sense for it to be Jackson Dart at this stage. If someone like an Ashton Genty falls to this point, I think they'd snap him off or even trade up to get him. Obviously, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren are both free agents, so they are going to need to hit running back somewhere, either free agency or in the draft or both. And not impossible, they'll also attack the secondary. There's no picks here that really makes sense. I think wide receiver is by far the most likely outcome for the Steelers. And finally, here's Thomas. This is a bit surprisingly low for me. I think he probably should go a little bit higher. It's just there's no teams that are really screaming for a cornerback. I'm just a little bit unsure on him. A lot of people are kind of torn on where he should go. So I've got him going here. I had them going defensive tackle previously, but I think they can probably get enough talent at that spot later in the draft. Also, a lot of people mocking them a tight end. Not sure that really makes sense. They really love Will Dissly. For some reason, teams always love Will Dissly. He's a good blocker and he's got solid hands. He's just fine. And I think that's all Jim Harbaugh needs. He's definitely not going to spend up on a running back or something like that, for example, even though people are going to say that he should. I can imagine him going for wide receiver in the second and third rounds or grabbing one in free agency. I think that would make a lot more sense after they've just spent up to get Ladd McConkey. So that leads me to cornerback, and I do feel like they can afford to get a little bit better here. I think this kind of makes sense. And here's another cornerback. I've really tossed up between an edge rusher or someone along the D line and cornerback for the Packers. It's not a desperate need, but it's kind of where the quality is at this point in the draft. A lot of people mocking them wide receiver as well. That doesn't make any sense to me. They're cycling through 4 wide receivers. Why add a 5th one? That doesn't really make any sense. I don't care what Josh Jacobs is going to come out and say, regardless of whether he wants a wide receiver. They've got plenty of talent there. They need to sort out their defense. Edge rush makes sense, especially with the Smiths both likely gone. Za'Darius has been gone for a while, but Preston Smith likely gone. They need someone over from Rashan Gary. Would make sense to grab someone if there's someone they really like here, maybe a Nick Skirton, maybe even a Mike Green or someone like that would be possible. If someone falls, it would certainly make sense here. Jelon Walker could fall to this spot, for example. He'd be a solid fit. Could potentially strengthen the interior of the O-line too, but think it makes more sense to go cornerback. So I've given the Benjamin Morrison here kind of a high upside pick. He could easily elevate their secondary, and I feel like they probably would take a risk here. And that kind of hurts the Vikings, who I think would have liked Morrison better than Barron. Barron's more of like a smaller slot guy. It's not really a need for them. They've got Josh Metellus there, but I don't love how he's been playing. I know he makes some big plays, but I don't think it really makes sense to have him in the slot. They have gotten rid of, or at least they have free agents in most of their other cornerback positions, so they could use a bigger guy, but Barron does belong sort of in this range, so I can imagine him going here. I don't know if I'll end up mocking him to the Vikings specifically, but this is certainly the range 20 to 30 where I can imagine him going. And I can definitely imagine the Vikings going cornerback. It does feel by far like their biggest need. If they don't go here, probably a defensive tackle, maybe a guard if one falls. And here's the Texans going against what I thought they would do last mock. I was saying, despite the fact that Stephon Diggs is an undrafted free agent and Tank Dell's going to miss most of next year, I was like, I don't think they go wide receiver. I think they've got Nico Collins. They can probably piece things together with everyone else they've got. But I don't know. Defensive tackle's an easy pick, but who are they taking here? Why not wait till the second round when there's a whole heap of guys still hanging around, or even trade down and get a defensive tackle? O-line isn't a great value either at this point. There's just no one that's a screaming value. So I think wide receiver makes sense given Egbuka fell to this point. If he didn't, I can't see them reaching up for someone like, I don't know, Isaiah Bond or something like that. That'll be possible. Give that kind of speed guy that comes in and complements Collins. I think that makes sense. But Egbuka makes the most sense to me here. A couple of people mocked them tight end as well. I think that's really interesting, but I think they're happy with Schultz, and Cade Stover's kind of there to take over as well. And here is the tight end. Speaking of tight ends, Colston Loveland moves into my mock for the first time. Very talented tight end. I like him. I'm not sure that he's quite a first round player. I think it kind of makes sense for the Rams to take him here, though. Tyler Higbee is definitely aging, can't stay healthy. They kind of need to replace Higbee or Kupp. Not sure that there's the wide receivers here to replace Kupp. They could go with Isaiah Bond, but I think Loveland is that 3-down kind of player. Would give a weapon for Matthew Stafford and kind of be a nice complement to Puka Nacua instead of being someone that doesn't really add to what they have at the moment. They've kind of already got some smaller speed guys, so I don't know that Bond really makes sense. What they really do need is a left tackle, but I'm not really sure who that would be at this point. They could go with someone like a Simmons. Look, Membu maybe out of Mizzou would possibly make sense. Not out of the question, someone like a Gray Zabel gets pushed up a little bit because someone needs him. But I don't know. I'm just not feeling it here. I feel like tight end for the second time in 2 drafts is where I'm going to go. But this time with no Warren on the board, they go with Loveland instead. Once again, I've got Ravel going to the Ravens. The Ravens just go for value, and I feel like they're going to see a guy who tore his ACL. They'll know, he's probably going to be fine ultimately. They need to sort out their secondary, and so they go with Ravel. Also possible they'll fix the O-line so they can make things a little bit easier for their run game and for Lamar Jackson. But this feels like the most logical option. Wouldn't be crazy to go for a slot receiver here. I think Isaiah Bond would make sense here. I think this is a slightly better fit. But I still don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think it makes sense. Edge rusher, not out of the question either. They could easily go for someone like a Mike Green or Skirden. I think they both look like value to them there, depending on how much they like them. If someone like a Jelon Walker falls to this point, they're stacking him up. No doubt they might even trade up for him. But I kind of like the Ravel here. Here's another new player popping into my draft, Shamar Stewart. Is this really a fit for the Lions? They do tend to go on personality. Stewart's a very talented player, but he needs a lot of development. Not exactly the type of hard worker they generally go with, but I'm not sure that there's really true character question marks on him compared to someone like a Mike Green. So Stewart makes sense at this point. Nick Skirden wouldn't be out of the question here as well. But I'm going to go with Stewart. I do feel like edge rusher makes the most sense for them. Someone opposite Aiden Hutchinson. They could easily go cornerback, but they've gone 2 in the last draft. So why would you do that again? They could also go interior of either line as well. Someone like an Alfred Collins, for example, a big like run stuffer, I think would be an option too. Speaking of Alfred Collins, he is coming up very soon, but not before his Texas teammate Isaiah Bond. Really struggled with the Commanders because I feel like they need to improve their edge rush and they need to get better at tackle. So they basically need to get better on the edges of both lines. and yet I have them going wide receiver. Besides Terry McLaurin, they've really got no one coming back at the moment. Jaden Daniels needs to be supported as a priority. Offensive tackle would help do that. But at the same time, I think Bond is a nice complement to what Scary Terry does as being that deep threat. Bond, kind of like a smaller speed guy, adding a lot more speed to this offense. That would make them very difficult, especially with what Daniels can do as a runner. I think this would be a nice fit. I think it kind of makes sense. And here's his teammate, Alfred Collins. Look, the Bills need to get better at stopping the run. They need some better talent in the interior of their line, and Collins is a great fit. There's a heap of guys in that kind of first, second round bubble as O-linemen. Someone like an Omar Norman Lott would make sense. Jordan Birch would make sense. They missed out. TJ Sanders wouldn't be crazy as like an interior rusher in this spot. I can imagine him going here as well. Walter Nolan, I'll talk about a second as well. Plus some edge rushers, they could easily go here as well. I don't think they'd go with an edge rusher. I feel like the interior is where they need the help most. Wide receiver wouldn't be out of the question, but I think they're happy with what the rotation they have going on. They could go safety if one of those top two guys makes it, or even potentially cornerback or linebacker if Campbell's here, but I think it's got to be a defensive tackle at this stage, and Collins the best fit for me. And here's Walter Nolan. This isn't exactly a Chiefs pick, but I keep thinking the Chiefs should take a tackle here, and they keep not doing it. Nolan's a really interesting one. Charlie Campbell had a report just today, actually, talking about how he canvassed some of the scouts across the league. Some had him as a first rounder. Quite a few had him as a second rounder. Some even had him as a mid-rounder. Real love-hate prospect. A lot of character concerns, a lot of inconsistent tape. Moved to Ole Miss and was better, but still put down some pretty bad tape at times as well. But the talent's clearly there. And I feel like I can imagine the Chiefs wanting to improve the interior of their O-line simply because they weren't good enough there last year. I do think they need to improve their O-line as well. But, I mean, who are they going to take here? I mocked them an O-lineman last draft, and I just wasn't happy. I feel like he's the kind of guy that can go next round. They could reach up and get someone like, I don't know, Josh Connolly or something like that. That wouldn't be out of the question. Membu maybe as some tackle options. Gray Zabel. But I've given them Nolan here. I may change my mind in the future. And finally, the champion Eagles. They've won the Super Bowl, and they win some value here with Nick Skirton, who I think could easily go earlier. But there's also people who are mocking him late in the second round, so it can go easy way. I've seen him mocked out at 8th overall, in fact. That was Eddie Brown, who I do definitely respect. Although I think that he's probably going to drop him in his next update potentially, because I just don't think that makes sense having him that early. This is kind of a best player available thing, but the Eagles do tend to go for the Lions, particularly their defense of late. So I do feel like Skirton's a good option here. He's big, he's fast, he's risky, but if you're the Eagles, you don't have too many holes. You can afford to take another upside swing. And that's all I've got for my mock draft 2.0. If you've got any questions, pop them down below. Hit us up on Instagram or Twitter. My dynasty rankings are over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. And if you're looking forward to more content, either on dynasty or my next mock draft, then make sure you like and subscribe, and you can check out the next one as well. Also do some articles over at football.rasball.com, so you can check them out too. I will be back next time with more mock draft fun, more fantasy fun on the Fantasy First Down.